What happens when humanity faces an enemy that doesn't just invade, but transforms everything it touches? Lieutenant Myers thought he was fighting a war, but the truth he uncovered turned his world upside down in ways no one could have imagined. Lieutenant James Myers crouched behind the crumbling remains of what was once a thriving city square, his breath fogging up the visor of his combat helmet. The air around him crackled with energy blasts, each one illuminating the chaos unfolding across the battlefield. His unit had been tasked with holding this position against an enemy they barely understood, creatures that weren't just invaders but something far more insidious. These aliens didn't attack outright. Instead, they infiltrated, corrupted, and consumed their hosts from within. Myers' mind raced back to the first reports months ago when civilians began acting strangely. Entire towns disappeared without explanation, only for reconnaissance teams to find them vacant, save for unsettling organic growths pulsing on walls like living tumors. It wasn't until weeks later that humanity realized the truth. These were no ordinary invaders. They were parasitic organisms capable of assimilating human bodies into grotesque hybrids while retaining fragments of their hosts' memories. By the time anyone figured it out, entire divisions had fallen, not to brute force, but to betrayal by comrades who weren't themselves anymore. The sound of screeching metal snapped Myers back to reality. A nearby transport ship exploded mid-flight, sending debris raining down onto the streets below. He clenched his jaw, gripping his plasma rifle tighter. "Hold your ground," he shouted over comms, though he knew morale was slipping fast. Their numbers dwindled every hour, not just due to casualties, but because some of their own kept vanishing, only to reappear moments later with glassy eyes and twisted forms. As another wave of enemies surged forward, Myers couldn't help but wonder how long they could keep fighting something so fundamentally alien. What if there truly was no way to stop them? What if surrender meant becoming part of whatever monstrosity they planned next? We only just scratched the surface of this harrowing tale, but trust me, it's about to get even darker. Stay tuned to witness how Myers confronts truths too horrifying to comprehend. The skirmish intensified as Myers led his squad through a labyrinth of collapsed buildings and tangled wreckage. Each step felt heavier than the last, not just from exhaustion but from the growing realization that victory seemed impossible. Every corner turned revealed new horrors, once human figures now mutilated beyond recognition, their movements jerky yet unervingly precise. Some carried weapons stolen from fallen allies, while others relied on razor-sharp claws sprouting from their arms. One such hybrid lunged at Myers, its elongated jaw snapping shut mere inches from his face. He fired instinctively, the recoil jolting his arm as blue plasma tore through the creature's chest. But instead of collapsing, it staggered backward, clutching at the wound where tendrils slithered outward, attempting to seal itself shut. Myers fired again and again until finally, the thing stopped moving. Breathing heavily, he glanced at his trembling hands. How many more could he kill before they overwhelmed him? His thoughts drifted briefly to Captain Reynolds, the man who'd trained him years ago. She'd always said war was unpredictable, but nothing could have prepared them for this. Back then, the enemy had faces you could recognize, motives you could anticipate. Now, nothing made sense. Even communication attempts failed miserably. The parasites communicated telepathically, leaving humans unable to decipher their strategies or intentions. Suddenly, static erupted in Myers' earpiece. "Lieutenant," came the frantic voice of Private Daniels. "We've got movement underground. Thermal scans show hundreds, maybe thousands gathering beneath us." Before Myers could respond, the ground trembled violently, cracks spreading beneath their boots. Something massive was coming, and it wasn't going to stay hidden for long. This is where things start spiraling out of control. We're teetering on the edge of a revelation that will change everything. You won't want to miss what happens next. Dust filled the air as chunks of pavement crumbled into the abyss below. Myers stumbled, catching himself against a jagged wall just as a deafening roar echoed from deep within the earth. Whatever lurked down there was enormous, a behemoth unlike anything they'd encountered before. Panic rippled through the ranks, but Myers forced himself to remain calm. If they broke formation now, they'd be slaughtered instantly. "Get everyone back to higher ground," he ordered, motioning for his remaining troops to retreat toward a partially intact skyscraper. As they scrambled uphill, the ground split open wider, revealing a cavernous pit illuminated by eerie green light. From its depths emerged towering shapes, hybrids larger than tanks, their bodies fused with machinery scavenged from conquered territories. Spikes protruded from their backs, and their heads tilted unnaturally, scanning the horizon with cold precision. Private Chen, stationed near Myers, whispered hoarsely, "What are those things?" "I don't know," Myers admitted grimly, "but we need to hold them off until reinforcements arrive." Except deep down, he doubted help would come. Communication lines were spotty at best, and HQ hadn't responded to their distress calls in hours. Were they abandoned? Or worse, had command fallen victim to the same fate plaguing their ranks? The hybrids advanced methodically, firing beams of concentrated energy that vaporized anything in their path. Myers' team opened fire, their efforts pitiful compared to the sheer power arrayed against them. Explosions rocked the area, throwing soldiers off their feet. Through the chaos, Myers spotted Corporal Ramirez dragging an injured comrade toward cover. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward them, dodging falling debris and narrowly avoiding a lethal blast. When he reached Ramirez, the corporal shouted, "We can't win this, sir. Fall back." For a moment, Myers considered retreating, but then he saw it. High above the battlefield, hovering silently among the clouds, was a massive alien vessel shaped like a leviathan. Its underside glowed faintly, casting an ominous shadow over the city. Somehow, he knew, this was their source of control. Destroying it might turn the tide or doom them all. The alien vessel loomed overhead, its presence both mesmerizing and terrifying. Myers clenched his fists, his mind racing with possibilities. If they could disable that ship, maybe, just maybe, they'd sever the connection between the parasites and their central hive mind. But how? Their weapons barely scratched the surface of the smaller hybrids. What chance did they have against something so colossal? "Lieutenant!" Private Daniels shouted, snapping Myers out of his thoughts. "We've got incoming flankers on the east side." Myers turned to see a swarm of agile parasite hybrids scaling the ruins around them, their claws scraping against concrete and metal. They moved with predatory grace, circling the squad like wolves closing in on prey. Myers raised his rifle, firing a burst of plasma that sent one tumbling backward, but two more took its place almost instantly. "We need to fall back," Ramirez yelled, dragging the injured soldier further into cover. "We're getting overrun." "No," Myers barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. "If we retreat now, we lose the high ground. Hold your positions." He knew it was risky, reckless even, but losing momentum here would mean certain death. They had to hold long enough to figure out their next move. As the battle raged on, Myers noticed something strange about the hybrids' behavior. Despite their overwhelming numbers, they weren't attacking indiscriminately. Instead, they seemed to be testing the humans, probing for weaknesses. It was as if they were learning, adapting. The realization sent a chill down his spine. These creatures weren't just fighting blindly, they were strategizing. Suddenly, a deafening screech pierced the air, causing everyone to freeze. The towering behemoth hybrids from earlier began advancing again, their massive forms shaking the ground with every step. Myers' heart sank as he realized they were being herded, pushed toward the open expanse where the skyscraper stood isolated. It was a trap, and they were walking right into it. The wind howled as Myers peered over the edge of the crumbling rooftop, watching the behemoths close in. His team was pinned down, their ammunition dwindling rapidly. Desperation clawed at his chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. There had to be a way out, some advantage they could exploit. "Sir," Chen called out, pointing toward the horizon. "Look!" Through the haze of smoke and dust, Myers spotted movement. A convoy of armored vehicles speeding toward their position. Reinforcements, or another wave of horrors. For a fleeting moment, hope flickered in his chest. Then he saw the vehicles stop abruptly, and figures poured out. Not soldiers, but more hybrids, their grotesque forms illuminated by the fires below. "They're cutting us off," Ramirez muttered, reloading his weapon with trembling hands. "We're surrounded." Myers gritted his teeth. "Then we fight our way out." He scanned the battlefield, searching for anything that could give them an edge. That's when he noticed it. A cluster of glowing pods embedded in the side of the nearest building. They pulsed faintly, like living organs, and emitted a low hum that vibrated in his bones. Whatever they were, they seemed important to the parasites. Maybe destroying them would disrupt their coordination, or at least buy some time. "Chun, Daniels, with me," Myers ordered, motioning toward the pods. "Ramirez, keep covering fire." The trio dashed across the exposed rooftop, dodging energy blasts and leaping over debris. As they reached the pods, Myers hesitated. Up close, they looked disturbingly organic. Veiny tendrils snaked outward, embedding themselves into the structure. Were they part of the parasite network? Or something else entirely? "Do it," Myers said finally, raising his rifle. "Blow them." Chun and Daniels fired simultaneously, their shots tearing through the pods. The resulting explosion was deafening, sending shockwaves rippling through the area. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the hybrids froze, their movements halting mid-step. Myers allowed himself a brief smile. It worked. But the reprieve was short-lived. From the shadows emerged a new threat. A humanoid figure cloaked in shimmering black armor, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. It wasn't a hybrid, it was something else entirely. And it was heading straight for Myers. The figure moved with unnatural speed, closing the distance between itself and Myers in seconds. Its presence radiated menace, and Myers felt an inexplicable urge to lower his weapon. He fought against the sensation, raising his rifle and firing a shot that harmlessly dissipated against an invisible barrier surrounding the entity. "Fall back," Myers shouted, backing away as the figure advanced. His team scrambled to regroup, but the hybrids had recovered from their temporary paralysis and were now surging forward once more. The battlefield erupted into chaos again, though this time, Myers couldn't shake the feeling that the cloaked figure was deliberately targeting him. "What is that thing?" Chun asked, panic creeping into his voice. "I don't know," Myers admitted, keeping his sights trained on the figure. "But we can't let it get close." The entity paused, tilting its head as if studying Myers. Then, without warning, it lunged, faster than anyone could react. Myers barely managed to dive out of the way, rolling to his feet just in time to see the figure's hand slice cleanly through a nearby hybrid as if it were nothing more than vapor. The creature dissolved into ash, leaving behind only a faint trace of green mist. Myers stared in disbelief. Was this thing an ally, or just another predator? Before he could decide, the figure turned its gaze back on him, and Myers felt a sharp pain in his temples. It was probing his mind, sifting through memories and emotions like a thief rifling through drawers. Images flashed before his eyes. His childhood, his training, the faces of fallen comrades. All laid bare for this alien intruder to examine. "Get out of my head," Myers growled, clutching his helmet as the pressure intensified. He squeezed the trigger of his rifle repeatedly, desperation overriding logic. Each shot fizzled harmlessly against the barrier, but the act of resistance seemed to satisfy the entity. It stepped back, lowering its hand, and the invasive presence vanished. "You resist," the figure said, its voice resonating inside Myers' skull. "Why?" Before Myers could respond, the ground shook violently, and the behemoth hybrids resumed their advance. The entity turned and disappeared into thin air, leaving Myers and his team to face the onslaught alone. The battlefield was a cacophony of chaos. The behemoth hybrids thundered forward, their massive forms shaking the earth beneath Myers' feet. He steadied himself, his mind racing to process what had just happened. That entity, it wasn't like the others. It hadn't attacked him directly, and its cryptic question lingered in his thoughts. "Why do you resist?" But there was no time to dwell on it now. The hybrids were closing in, their claws slicing through the air with deadly precision. Myers glanced at his team, what was left of them. Chun was reloading furiously, sweat pouring down his face. Daniels clutched her side, blood seeping through her fingers. Ramirez stood defiantly, firing bursts of plasma into the advancing horde despite the futility of it all. "We can't hold them off forever," Ramirez shouted, desperation creeping into his voice. "What's the plan?" Myers didn't have one, not yet, but he couldn't let them see his uncertainty. Leadership wasn't about having all the answers. It was about making decisions when none seemed viable. And right now, they needed hope more than anything else. "Fall back to the stairwell," Myers barked, motioning toward the crumbling skyscraper behind them. "We'll funnel them into tight quarters." The squad obeyed without hesitation, retreating into the building as the behemoths began tearing apart the walls outside. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the structure groaned under the strain. Myers knew this place wouldn't hold much longer, but it bought them precious seconds to regroup. As they barricaded themselves inside, Myers noticed something strange etched into the wall. A series of symbols glowing faintly, almost imperceptibly. They looked similar to the markings on the pods they'd destroyed earlier. Whatever these parasites were, they left traces of their presence everywhere. "What are those?" Chun asked, pointing at the symbols. "I don't know," Myers admitted, running his gloved hand over them. "But I think they're important." Before anyone could respond, a deafening roar echoed through the building. One of the behemoths had breached the entrance, its massive frame barely fitting through the doorway. Myers cursed under his breath as chunks of concrete fell around them. They were trapped. Time slowed to a crawl as the behemoth hybrid lunged forward, its claws swiping at the soldiers with terrifying speed. Myers dove to the side, narrowly avoiding being impaled. Chun fired wildly, his shots ricocheting harmlessly off the creature's armored hide. Daniel screamed as part of the ceiling collapsed, pinning her leg beneath the rubble. Ramirez rushed to her aid, dragging her out of harm's way while Myers tried to formulate a plan. That's when he noticed it, the symbol glowing brighter as the behemoth drew closer. It pulsed in rhythm with the creature's movements, almost as if it were reacting to its presence. An idea sparked in Myers' mind, one so reckless it bordered on suicidal. "Chun, keep firing," Myers yelled, grabbing a grenade from his belt. "Ramirez, get Daniels clear." He sprinted toward the glowing symbol, dodging debris and energy blasts. The behemoth turned its attention to him, its glassy eyes locking onto him with predatory focus. Myers planted the grenade against the wall next to the symbol and activated the timer. Then he ran like hell. The explosion was deafening, sending a shockwave rippling through the building. For a moment, everything went silent. Then, the symbol erupted with blinding light, engulfing the behemoth in a cascade of energy. The creature screeched, thrashing violently before collapsing into a heap of ash and molten metal. What just happened? Chun stammered, staring wide-eyed at the smoldering remains. I don't know, Myers admitted, catching his breath. But we need to figure it out fast. The victory was short-lived. As the dust settled, Myers realized the skirmish had cost them dearly. Daniels was unconscious, her leg badly injured. Their ammunition was nearly depleted, and the building was on the verge of collapse. Worse still, the distant hum of the alien vessel above reminded him that their fight was far from over. "Sir," Ramirez said hesitantly, "we can't stay here. If reinforcements don't arrive soon." "They won't," Myers interrupted, his voice heavy with resignation. "We're on our own." He knelt beside Daniels, checking her vitals. She was alive, but she needed medical attention, and fast. Leaving her behind wasn't an option, but carrying her would slow them down even further. Every decision felt like a gamble, and the stakes only grew higher with each passing second. As they prepared to move, Myers noticed something peculiar. The glowing symbol on the wall hadn't faded completely. Instead, it projected a faint holographic image, a map of sorts detailing tunnels and pathways beneath the city. At its center was a pulsating red dot labeled in an alien script. "What is this?" Chun whispered, tracing the projection with his finger. "It's a network," Myers said slowly, piecing together fragments of intel from previous missions. "These parasites aren't just attacking, they're building something. A hive, maybe, or worse." The implications sent a chill down his spine. If they could locate and destroy the central hub, they might stand a chance. But getting there would mean navigating underground tunnels teeming with enemies, and risking everything on a hunch. "We follow the map," Myers declared, standing up. "It's our best shot." The descent into the tunnels was harrowing. The air grew colder and heavier with each step, thick with the scent of decay and something metallic. Myers led the way, his flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. Shadows danced along the walls, distorted by the grotesque organic growths pulsating softly in the gloom. The tunnels seemed alive, breathing with a sinister rhythm that matched the faint hum echoing from deep within. "This place gives me the creeps," Chin muttered, clutching his rifle tightly. "You're not alone," Ramirez replied grimly, keeping a watchful eye on their surroundings. Daniels, now semi-conscious, leaned heavily on Myers for support. Her breathing was labored, but she refused to give up. "Keep moving," she rasped weakly. "Don't stop for me." They pressed on, following the map's guidance until they reached a massive chamber filled with pulsating pods identical to the ones they destroyed earlier. At the center of the room loomed a towering structure, a biomechanical monstrosity pulsing with green energy. It was the heart of the parasite network, the source of their power. "Destroy it," Myers ordered, raising his weapon. "Now!" As they opened fire, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Hybrids poured in from every direction, their screeches reverberating off the walls. The battle was fierce and chaotic, but Myers kept his focus on the central structure. This was their only chance. With one final, desperate blast, the structure exploded, sending a shockwave through the tunnels. The parasites screamed as their connection was severed, their bodies dissolving into ash. The alien vessel above flickered and vanished, leaving only silence in its wake. The aftermath was surreal. The tunnels began to collapse, forcing Myers and his team to retreat as quickly as possible. Exhausted and battered, they emerged into the pale light of dawn, greeted by the sight of a devastated city slowly coming back to life. Survivors wandered the streets, dazed but free from the parasite's influence. Myers sank to his knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and relief. They had done it. Against all odds, they had stopped the invasion. But the cost weighed heavily on his shoulders. Too many lives lost, too much destruction wrought. As he stared at the horizon, a familiar voice echoed in his mind. "Why do you resist?" The question haunted him, reminding him of the deeper truths he had glimpsed during the battle. These parasites weren't just invaders. They were survivors, driven by instincts as primal as humanity's own. Had they truly been fighting monsters or reflections of themselves? The silence that followed the destruction of the parasite network was both liberating and unsettling. Myers sat amidst the ruins, his body aching from the countless battles fought in the past hours, or had it been days. Time seemed to blur together in the haze of adrenaline and exhaustion. Around him, survivors began to gather, their faces etched with confusion, relief, and sorrow. Some hugged loved ones they hadn't seen since the invasion began. Others wandered aimlessly, searching for answers or closure. Daniels lay propped against a crumbling wall, her leg hastily bandaged but still bleeding. She managed a weak smile as Myers approached. "Guess we did it, huh?" she murmured, her voice barely audible over the distant rumble of collapsing structures. "We did," Myers replied, though the words felt hollow. Victory came at a steep price. The city was in ruins, its skyline reduced to jagged skeletons of steel and concrete. The streets were littered with debris and bodies, too many bodies. And yet, the parasite's defeat didn't bring the sense of triumph he'd expected. Instead, an uneasy question lingered in his mind. What now? As if on cue, a low hum filled the air. Not the mechanical drone of alien ships, but something softer, almost melodic. Myers froze, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. The sound grew louder, resonating deep within his chest. It wasn't threatening, but it carried an undeniable weight, as if it demanded attention. "Do you hear that?" Chen asked, looking around nervously. Ramirez nodded, his weapon raised. "Where's it coming from?" Myers scanned the horizon, his eyes narrowing as he spotted movement near the edge of the city. Figures emerged from the shadows, humanoid shapes clad in shimmering black armor identical to the entity he'd encountered earlier. They moved in unison, their steps deliberate and unhurried. At their center stood the same figure who had invaded Myers' mind during the battle. The figure stopped several meters away, its glowing eyes locking onto Myers. The rest of the group fanned out behind it, forming a loose semicircle. None of them made any aggressive moves, but their presence was suffocating. Myers tightened his grip on his rifle, though he doubted it would do much good against whatever these beings were. "What do you want?" Myers demanded, his voice steady despite the unease twisting in his gut. "You resisted," the figure said, its voice echoing not just in Myers' ears but in his very thoughts. Why? The question struck a nerve. Why had he resisted? Was it duty, survival instinct, or something deeper, a refusal to surrender to forces he couldn't comprehend? Myers hesitated, unsure how to articulate the storm of emotions swirling inside him. "Because giving up isn't an option," he finally answered. "Not for us." The figure tilted its head, studying him intently. "You fight to preserve what you are, yet you destroy without understanding. Do you know what you have undone?" Myers frowned. "I stopped you from consuming this planet. Isn't that enough?" The figure's gaze hardened. "You stopped nothing. You delayed the inevitable. Before Myers could respond, the ground beneath them trembled. A massive fissure split open, revealing a glowing abyss far below. From the depths rose another structure, larger and more intricate than the one they had destroyed. Tendrils of light snaked outward, weaving themselves into the fabric of the earth. This wasn't just a hive. It was a seed, planted long before humanity even existed. Myers staggered backward, his mind reeling. "What is that?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The beginning," the figure replied cryptically. "And perhaps the end." Chun stepped forward, his rifle trembling in his hands. "You're saying there's more? After everything we've been through?" "There will always be more," the figure said, its tone devoid of emotion. "Your resistance delays, but it does not prevent. We are not your enemy, Lieutenant Myers. We are evolution." The words hit like a punch to the gut. Evolution. The parasites weren't invaders. They were harbingers of change, agents of transformation meant to reshape life itself. Humanity's defiance hadn't thwarted their plans. It had merely postponed them. Worse still, Myers realized the truth too late. By destroying the initial network, he may have accelerated the process, awakening something far greater than anything they'd faced before. "What happens now?" Ramirez asked, his voice laced with dread. The figure turned its gaze toward the rising sun, its silhouette stark against the golden light. "Now you witness the next stage. Whether you survive it depends on your choices." With that, the figures vanished, leaving Myers and his team alone once more. But the ominous glow emanating from the fissure reminded them that their ordeal was far from over. Days passed, or maybe weeks. Time lost all meaning as Myers and his team struggled to make sense of what they'd learned. The fissure remained active, its energy spreading across the planet. Reports poured in from other regions. Strange weather patterns, inexplicable mutations in wildlife, and humans exhibiting bizarre abilities. The parasite's influence hadn't ended, it had evolved. Myers stood atop a hill overlooking the city, now partially reclaimed by nature. Vines wrapped around skeletal buildings, and flowers bloomed in colors never seen before. It was beautiful, yet haunting. He thought back to the entity's words, "We are evolution." Had they truly fought against progress? Or had they simply delayed the inevitable? Daniels joined him, leaning heavily on a cane. Her recovery was slow, but she refused to give up. "What do we do now, sir?" she asked softly. Myers sighed, watching the horizon. "We adapt, just like we always have." For better or worse, humanity's story wasn't over. It had only begun anew. If you enjoyed this epic journey into the unknown, don't forget to subscribe for more thrilling tales that challenge the boundaries of imagination. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an update, and join us as we explore the mysteries of the universe, one story at a time.